Hello, I'm Jessie, and welcome back to the Happiness Hippie podcast. There is an image at the center of today's essay that is so simple it almost slips past you until you realize how much of life it explains. If you get on the wrong train, get off at the first stop, because the longer you stay on, the more expensive the return trip becomes. The essay we're exploring today, Knowing When to Leave a Relationship with Care, takes that image and applies it to one of the hardest human decisions there is. Not because leaving is always the answer, and not because every difficult relationship is the wrong train, but because many people stay far beyond the point where staying is honest. I'm joined by the author, and what struck me immediately is that this is not a piece about quitting lightly. It is about learning to recognize direction before cost turns into damage. As I read it, I kept feeling that the essay is really about dignity as much as relationship. It asks what a bond is asking from you over time. Is it asking you to become clearer, steadier, more honest, more capable of love? Or is it asking you to shrink, manage, explain, absorb, and slowly abandon yourself in order to keep the thing going? That is a much deeper question than simply asking whether a relationship has good moments or whether there is still affection left inside it.
Oh, it's good to be here, Jesse. I think that image of the train works because it captures something people know in their bodies before they're ready to admit it in word. Most people do not wake up one morning in a perfectly clear state and say, "This relationship is wrong, I must leave now." What usually happens is quieter than that. There is a pattern, a direction, a repeated cost that does not feel catastrophic in any single moment, yet accumulates over time. That is why the essay keeps returning to direction rather than isolated incident. A train is not just a compartment you happen to be sitting in. It is movement. It is carrying you somewhere. Relationships work the same way. They influence your daily mood, your self-trust, the way you speak, the way you think, the amount of energy you have left after contact, and the version of yourself that gets reinforced over time. So one of the most important questions is not simply, do I love this person, or do I care about this friendship? But where is this relationship taking me if I stay in it as it is?
That is such an important distinction because many people stay inside the emotional question and never move to the directional one. They ask, do I still care? Do they still care? Is there enough good here? Am I being unfair? Am I expecting too much? All of those questions matter, but they can also distract from the deeper reality that a relationship may be going in a direction you do not want your life to go. And I think that is one reason so many people remain too long. The relationship is not entirely bad. There is still affection, history, tenderness, maybe even loyalty. So they keep treating the problem as though it were a rough patch instead of a pattern.
Exactly. Many of the most difficult exits are not from relationships that are entirely destructive. They're from relationships where something real and good still exists, but not enough to make the whole structure healthy. That is a much harder thing to face because the mind prefers a clean verdict. Good person or bad person, loyalty or betrayal. Stay or go. Real life is rarely that neat. Sometimes a relationship contains care, but also repeated diminishment. Sometimes affection is real, but so is the cost. A friendship may not be openly cruel, only quietly draining. A romantic bond may contain warmth, attraction, and shared history, and still be wrong for the life you're trying to build. That is where discernment becomes essential, because without it, people keep paying for a direction they would never consciously choose.
The section on what a relationship requires from you felt especially sharp to me. You suggest that one of the clearest ways to assess a relationship is to notice who you have to become in order to remain in it. That is such a strong test because it gets beneath chemistry and sentiment and brings you straight to character. You have to make yourself smaller. Do you rehearse your words because honesty is punished? Do you return from time that this person feeling more like yourself or more edited, more careful, more unsettled? That is not dramatic language, it is diagnostic language.
I think it is diagnostic, yes, because unhealthy relationships do not always reveal themselves through spectacular conflict. Sometimes they reveal themselves through quiet self-erosion. You become more cautious with your truth. You start managing another person's moods. You explain away the same discomfort repeatedly. You call it patience when it is really avoidance. You call it understanding when it is really self-betrayal. And none of this happens all at once. That's part of what makes it hard to see. The withdrawals are small. A little less peace, a little less confidence, a little less trust in your own judgment, a little more emotional management, a little more internal rehearsal, a little more fatigue after contact. By the time someone says, "I no longer feel like myself here," the process has often been going on for quite a while.
The essay also handles values very well. People do not need perfect agreement to have a healthy relationship, but they do need some shared respect for what matters. When values are marked, dismissed, manipulated, or repeatedly stepped over, affection cannot really compensate for that forever. That seems especially relevant because many people confuse emotional attachment with actual alignment.
They do, and that confusion can become expensive. Affection can soften a lot of things, but it cannot replace basic respect. If a relationship repeatedly asks you to betray what you know matters, it's already moving against your well-being. And growth is part of this too. Some relationships make room for change. Others depend on keeping you in a smaller or older version of yourself, because that version is easier for them to manage. That is a very important signal. If becoming healthier, clearer, more independent, or more honest threatens to bond, then the bond may not actually be supporting your life. It may be depending on your diminishment.
The fear section felt very compassionate, and I was glad you wrote it that way. It's easy to speak about leaving as though it were just a matter of courage, as though people simply needed to get on with it. But that ignores reality. Children, finances, faith, family pressure, housing, reputation, habit, trauma, safety, loneliness, all of these things shape the decision. So the essay does not romanticize departure. It recognizes that for some people, leaving is not a single action, but a process of reclaiming enough internal ground to even imagine a different life.
Yes, and I think that matters, because otherwise the conversation becomes careless. Some people are not just emotionally attached, they're practically entangled. Others are not trapped by logistics, but by fear, guilt, or the weight of investment. They think, "I've already given this so much, I can't leave now." But that's exactly where the train metaphor becomes useful. The length of your investment doesn't prove that staying makes sense. It only explains why leaving feels costly. The fear is real, though. People may fear being judged, being seen as disloyal, selfish, unstable, or ungrateful. They may fear admitting that their hope was misplaced. They may fear the grief that comes with saying, "I wanted this to be something it never became." That grief should not be dismissed. But grief is not always proof that leaving is wrong. Sometimes it's simply the cost of finally telling the truth.
There is also that deeply uncomfortable section about how staying too long reshapes us. That felt painfully accurate. A harmful relationship does not just consume time, it can retrain your instincts. You start normalizing discomfort. You get good at predicting moods, avoiding subjects, softening needs, editing truths, and managing tension as though it were weather. Then one day you realize that the relationship has not only been difficult, it has slowly reorganized your nervous system.
That is one of the hidden costs, yes. The emotional cost is rarely announced dramatically. It becomes normal by repetition. What once felt unacceptable begins to feel ordinary because you have adapted to it. That is why people sometimes need emotional resilience in order to leave, not only in order to stay and cope. Leaving may require you to trust what you have noticed after a long period of explaining it away. Often, the body knows first. There is a heaviness before seeing the person, relief when plans are canceled, tension before certain conversations, exhaustion after contact. That does not automatically make the decision, but those signals deserve respect. The body often stops negotiating before the mind has finished bargaining.
I thought the section on leaving with integrity was especially useful because it did not turn the exit into a performance. It did not say be brutal. It did not say disappear. It said clarity matters. A clean ending is often kinder than a vague, guilty half ending that keeps everyone in negotiation. And yet, at the same time, you make room for the fact that some departures are internal before they become external. A person may first stop seeking approval, stop absorbing blame, stop explaining everything, stop participating in old patterns. That internal departure is part of the exit too.
It is. Sometimes the inner departure is what makes the outer one possible. A person has to recover enough self-trust to act. And when the outer departure does come, integrity matters. Not endless explanation, but honesty where honesty is possible. If the decision has been made, it should not be disguised as ongoing debate just because guilt feels uncomfortable. At the same time, not every ending needs hostility. Some relationships mattered and still need to end. Some people loved us within the limits of what they understood. Some bonds were meaningful for a season and damaging beyond it. The mind likes villains because villains make departure emotionally cleaner. Life does not always provide them.
The final section about the space that opens after leaving was very strong because it refuses fantasy. It does not pretend that freedom feels wonderful immediately. Sometimes what comes first is grief, disorientation, loneliness, and the strange unfamiliarity of no longer managing someone else's emotional weather. But then, gradually, something else appears. Attention returns, energy returns, sleep improves, preferences return. Life starts to feel like your own again. That felt honest to me because too many conversations about leaving focus only on the relief and not on the adjustment.
Yes, and adjustment matters. Keys can feel unfamiliar if you've spent years bracing for conflict. The absence of tension may not immediately feel like happiness. It may feel empty at first because your system is still waiting for the next demand. But over time, the space begins to fill with something better. Clarity, rest, preference, creativity, the return of your own mind. And I think that's the deeper point of the essay. Every exit closes something, but it can also return you to yourself. The return trip may be costly, but it's not wasted. It teaches discernment. It helps you recognize what you once ignored. It shows you the difference between difficulty that strengthens a relationship and difficulty that slowly damages the people inside it.
And that brings us back to the Joseph Campbell line at the end, which is such a fitting way to close this kind of conversation. We must be willing to let go of the life we've planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. That feels especially true with relationships because sometimes what is hardest to release is not only the person, but the future we attach to them, the role we imagined, the version of our life we were still trying to save. But perhaps that is exactly where courage lives. Not in pretending the cost is small, and not in staying seated simply because we once bought the ticket, but in asking whether the direction still honours who we are becoming. If the answer is no, then perhaps leaving is not failure. Perhaps it is a form of truth, and perhaps truth is what makes a more honest life possible. If today's conversation resonated and you want more perspective on emotional clarity or meaningful living, begin at the Our Approach page at happinesshippie.com. And please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for being part of this community. We will talk again soon.